Good morning. I'm Ambalika Guha and I teach in the Department of English Language and Literature at Adamus University. Today is the last session of language acquisition and learning lesson, and this session will be on second language learning. And in this session, we will try to find out that whatever we have learned so far about first language acquisition, how different is second language learning from the first language acquisition. Okay, language is the method of expressing ideas and emotions. It's like a form of communication, and we have already discussed about it in our last session when we are talking about interactionist theory. So we express ideas and emotions in the forms of signs and symbols of language. So here the signs and symbols would be the words, phrases, sentences, sometimes sounds. It can be non-verbal language, non-verbal signs and symbols as well. So these signs and symbols, they are used to encode and decode the information. So whatever we receive from the environment, we decode that information. So there are a number of languages that are spoken in the world, and the first language learned by a child is always the native language, right? Because that is the immediate language that the child gets to hear from the environment. And it is the language which this child listens right from the stage of birth. So, any other language that is learned after the first language, that is the second language. So, in general sense, it is a term like we've been talking about second language acquisition. It is a term to describe learning a second language. So, more specifically, it is the name of the theory of the process by which we acquire or we pick up another language besides the first language which we have already developed. We all know that the first language knowledge that we develop, it goes through a very subconscious process, right? Or maybe also many a times it's also we are not even at all aware the kind of knowledge we're developing. But that is not the case of learning. In learning, we are at a fully conscious stage because it happens through a formal language education. So, if we talk about the definition of second language acquisition, it goes like this that this is the kind of learning or acquisition of a second language once the native language or the first language is already established. So, it is the systematic study of how people learn a language other than their mother tongue. So, second language acquisition is the process of learning other languages in addition to the native language. So, for instance, a child whose mother tongue is, let's say, Bengali and starts learning English when the child goes to school. Uh, this English is learned by the process of second language acquisition. Now, in fact, a young child can learn a second language faster than an adult, and we'll talk about the reason when we go through critical period and a lateralization process. So, language learning refers to any kind of formal learning of a language in a very formal setup like classroom. On the other hand, when we talk about language acquisition, that means that we are acquiring that language with little or maybe no formal training at all. So if we visit a foreign country, or maybe when we hear people speak a different language from our native language, um, what we can do, maybe we can go through a process of acquisition and instead of learning, because there no one is teaching us directly. It's just that we are in a foreign land and we keep on hearing people talking in some other language which is not our language, and gradually if we develop the other language, then it becomes an acquisition process. But learning would be something where formal training needs to get done. So let's say when we talk about the difference between language acquisition and learning, so what are the stages we had in let me just recapitulate the kind of stages that we had in first language acquisition, if you remember. um, and it seems that the children all over the world, they go through this similar stages of language acquisition, right? So where we talk about crying at the birth stage, then cooing 6 weeks, babbling 6 months, one word utterance which happens within a period of 1 year, two word utterances which happens within 18 months, formation of questions, negative constructions, it happens within the period of 2 years, 3 months, and complex, very rare constructions. It keeps on taking place by the age of 5 years. So by the age of 5 year, uh, the child can keep on, uttering novel sentences, and definitely the mature speech within the age of 10 years. Right. And we know that how the language is rule governed. We have already spoken about it. We have discussed when we're talking about language acquisition theories. Right. So let's see what kind of differences we have in acquisition and learning. So, learners acquire language through a subconscious process during which they are unaware of grammatical rules. So here we are talking about the child's first language. Okay, and this happens especially when they develop the knowledge of their first language. So they repeat what is being said to them, and gradually over a period of time, through the help of environment as well as through the process of innate language faculty device, with the help of cognitive development as well as with interaction or the turn taking process, the child acquires the knowledge of the first language, and that happens as a very natural process. Whereas, so acquisition, it's like subconscious or maybe unconscious process. It does not presuppose any kind of formal teaching, and it is a child who controls the pace of acquisition. It is not that from the environment it is getting controlled. Whereas if we talk about learning, learning is much more, it's like the result of a very direct instruction of rules. So, I mean, language learning doesn't have to be an age appropriate activity. It can be, I mean, any language can be learned at any age, but definitely learning gets difficult. I mean, particularly the new language learning gets difficult as the age also increases, and we'll discuss about it in few minutes. So learning is mostly an intentional process, and it presupposes formal training where the environment is either the teacher or anybody else in the environment who is training the child with the second language controls that pace. So in the first language acquisition, it's a child who controls the pace. In the second language, it is always the environment which controls the pace of that learning. Right. Uh, mm, let's talk about a little about critical period hypothesis. So this critical period hypothesis is the ability to acquire language biologically linked to age. So this hypothesis claims that there's a period of growth from early childhood to adolescence, and in which a full native competence is possible when we are learning a language. Now, this hypothesis was grounded in research which showed that people who lost their linguistic abilities, maybe due to some accident, so maybe due to some trauma that they had, so they were able to regain that language totally Um, if it happens before the age of 12, so before a child who hits puberty, if before that time the child goes through some kind of unfortunately some kind of damage, as a result of accident or trauma, so the child can gradually regain that language. And there's considerable evidence to support the claim that second language learners who begin learning as adults are unable to achieve native speaker like competence in either grammar or pronunciation. So, many a times, even I have also noticed this during classroom teaching, that if I have a learner with me who is a little older in age, the learner really faces more difficulties in learning compared to any young learner. Let's talk about young learner who is in the age of teenagers. So, derived from biology, this concept which we're talking about, critical period, is was presented by Penfield and Roberts. Lenneberg also spoke about it. So, Lenneberg contended that language acquisition device needed to take place between this age of 2 to puberty. Um, a period that Lenneberg believed to correspond with the lateralization process of the brain. So, the lateralization process of the brain, it is more of a very, cognitive process to be more dominant in one hemisphere than the other. Well, according to Lenneberg, this idea was concerned with the implicit automatic acquisition in any kind of emotion context. So there is evidence that development of language is a result of brain maturation. So equipotential hemispheres at birth, language gradually become lateralized in the left hemisphere. And we have also spoken about it when we were discussing the structure of the human brain, how the reptilian brain evolved into mammalian, then to the neocortex, which is the human brain finally, and we have the left and the right hemisphere. And we also discussed that how right hemisphere, helps us in communicating through images, whereas left hemisphere helps us in communicating through words. It gives us a verbal ability, but the right hemisphere, it gives us the spatial ability, right? Uh, there's this, evidence in neurological research that as the human brain matures, certain functions are assigned or lateralized. So to the left hemisphere of the brain and certain other functions to the right hemisphere of the brain. So intellectual, logical, analytical functions, they appear to be largely located in the left hemisphere. And if we can think, all these properties exist in language as well, right? So whereas the right hemisphere controls functions such as related to emotions and social needs. And so Lenneberg suggested that lateralization is a slow process that begins around the age of 2 and is completed around the age of puberty. So, within that period, if a child learns a language, that happens in a lot more easier fashion. But if the child learns a language after the lateralization period gets over, the child hits the puberty. So it gets difficult for the child to learn that language. Now, if we talk about the history of second language theories and approach, it always starts with the behaviorist approach, like the first language acquisition approach. Also, the first theory we discussed was behaviorist, right? And we know that how behaviorists talk about that language gets developed through habit formation process. It's like a notion of the stimulus response. So, when we are learning a second language, we already have a set of well-established responses in our native language. That knowledge of native language is already with us, and it is very well established. So the L2 learning process, the second language learning process, involves replacing those learned habits by a set of new ones. And the complication is that the old habit, which is the L1, the rules and the habits of L1, keeps on interfering with the process when when we learn L2, the second language. So at times that old habit or the old rules, they sometimes match with the new language data, so they help us with the learning process of the new language. And sometimes it interferes in a way, because the rules that we have learned of the first language, they will be different from the second language rules. So, since we have already a well-established set of rules of the first language, we keep on using them when we are learning the second language. So, if the structures in the second language are similar to those of the first language, learners will take place. I mean, this learning will take place very easily. If, however, the structures are realized differently in L1, which is my native language, and L2 is the second language, then learning will be difficult. So, from a teaching point of view, the implications of this approach were like twofold. So, first, language learning would take place by imitating and repeating the same structure time after time. That is what we have all done in our school days, right? The teachers say something and we keep on repeating it, and time after time we repeat, and this is how we have learned it. And the second approach is that where teachers need to focus the teaching on the areas of the L1 and the L2 differences. Now, this kind of approach can be adopted for the learners who are much older, and for them where the learning second language or any other language gets difficult. So maybe for those kind of learners, teaching them the first language and the second language differences helps the learning process, and this kind of process is called a contrastive analysis. So if you remember that about behaviorism, that stimulus response process, um, child when learning a new language keeps on making mistakes, and we have also spoken about it last time when we said the virtuous errors. Okay, now not only a child, even an adult learning a new language keeps on making mistakes. Why does, I mean, actually we don't call them mistakes, we call them errors for second language learners. And why does it happen? So old habits, they get in the way of learning new habits, right? So old habits already got of this particular first language that we developed, and the notion of this interference has a very central place in a behaviorist account of second language acquisition. So, when the first and second language share a meaning but express it in different ways, an error is likely to happen in second language, because the learner keeps on transferring the meaning or the words from the first language, right? The learner always keeps on translating from the first language to the second language. So automatically, error is supposed to happen. And the difference between the first and the second language, they create learning difficulty. Calling them errors, because many a times it happens that even if you point out the mistake to the learner finds it difficult to recognize, and the learner repeats that particular mistake. Okay. Uh, so Krashen has spoken about five central hypotheses which deals with second language learning or language learning process. So first one is the language acquisition learning hypothesis. Second is the monitor hypothesis. Third is the natural order hypothesis. And fourth is the input hypothesis. And fifth is the affective filter hypothesis. So, the acquisition learning hypothesis that Krashen speaks about, that claim that adult learners have two means for internalizing the target language. The first is acquisition, which is a subconscious and intuitive process of constructing the entire knowledge of the system of language. Mm, and the other one, the second means is just a conscious learning process in which the child, the learner, attend to some kind of form, figure out rules, generally aware of their own learning process. So, according to Krashen, what is consciously learned through the presentation of rules and explanations of grammar does not become the basis of acquisition of the target language. So, learning does not turn into acquisition. Our conscious learning process and our subconscious acquisition processes, they are mutually exclusive here. So, if you're talking about second language acquisition and not learning, you just have to be in that natural setting where everybody around you, they are talking to you or maybe talking to each other in that particular target language, and nobody is formally training you, so gradually you pick up that language. But again, as we discussed, that it becomes difficult after the age of puberty. So if it is, it becomes. I mean, the child try. I mean, gets it very naturally if it happens before the age of 12. But if it happens after the age of 12, then the process gets extremely difficult. The second hypothesis of Krashen, which is the monitor hypothesis, the monitor is like a device, for watching or maybe keeping surveillance of one's output. So this is a device which helps us in editing, making alterations or corrections as they're consciously perceived. So, acquisition initiates the speaker's utterance and is responsible for fluency. Thus the monitor is this device we are talking about. It is thought to alter the output of the acquired system before or after any kind of utterance is actually spoken or written. Now this hypothesis has important implications for language teaching. So Krashen argued that formal instruction in a language provides rule isolation, then there's a feedback process for the development of this monitor. But the production is based on what is acquired through communication. And with the monitor altering this production to improve our accuracy in the speech or maybe in our writing towards target language norms. That is what here we are talking about, the monitor or the device which is constantly watchdogging our output. So, Krashen's position is that conscious knowledge of rules uh, does not help in acquisition. It only enables the learners to polish up what they have acquired through communication. So, the focus of language teaching should not be rule learning. It will be better if it can happen in the process of interaction, or if it can happen in the process of communication. The third hypothesis is the natural order hypothesis. And this hypothesis states that we acquire the rules of language in a predictable order. So this is something which we have also spoken about when we discussed when we were discussing cognitivism, right? How about the noun advantage says that concrete nouns gets developed first compared to verbs and the other functional categories. So same thing happens in language learning. So some rules tend to come early and others come to us late. And this natural order of acquisition is presumed to be the result of the acquired system, which is operating free of any conscious grammar. So, the principal source of evidence for the natural order hypothesis, it comes to us from the morpheme studies. Uh, so, Krashen also maintained that there's a natural sequence for the development of the negative words or the auxiliary system, maybe the questions, inflections. So if we, I mean, we need to learn the verb first, then we can learn the tense inflections, right? Or maybe the subject inflections also. I mean, the gender, person, number inflections that get attached to the verb. So we need to learn verb first, and then we can learn these person, number, gender inflection. Then we can learn the tense inflection. So like, for example, we need to learn the noun first, and then we can learn the articles or the demonstratives. So we need to learn the proper names or common nouns. Then we can go ahead with like pronouns, right? Which actually refer to the proper noun or maybe to the common noun. So to conclude Krashen's argument for natural order hypothesis, it is largely based on the morpheme study. And the next hypothesis on Krashen's model is the input hypothesis. So, this hypothesis postulates that humans acquire language in only one way, by understanding messages or by receiving it. So, receiving is like the comprehensible input. The data that we are hearing, it should be understandable to us. So it's like a process where we are moving from the form of I, that is our current level of understanding or knowledge. The moment we have some kind of comprehensible data which we receive as an input, it becomes I plus one. That is like the next level along with the natural order. So an important part of the input hypothesis is Krashen's recommendation that speaking not be taught directly or very soon in the language classroom, because speech will emerge once the acquirer has built up enough comprehensible input. That stage has to be I plus one. It cannot be just I. Okay. So, I mean, if you teach in a second language learning classroom, you would notice this that, starting with a speaking activity, it doesn't work that well because learners' knowledge is still at this eye level. We first need to give them enough input which is understandable to them, that then only we can get I plus one. So, this comprehensible input is the route to acquisition and information about grammar in the target language, which is automatically available when the input is understood. So, it's like, think about the silent period. So, during this period, learners are presumably building up their competence in the target language just by listening. So, Krashen argued that they are making use of this comprehensible input that they receive. So, once competence has been built up, then the speech can emerge. This is the same kind of process even in the first language acquisition happens, right? We listen of like a lot of data we receive as input, and then we can go ahead with the output. The next hypothesis that we have is the natural approach. If we talk about like no communication competence or functional ability in a language, which arises from exposure to the language in meaningful settings, where meanings expressed by the language as they're understood. So, rules, patterns, vocabularies, all other language forms, not everything gets learned as the way or the manner in which they're presented. But gradually over a period of time, through a lot of practice, through a lot of communication, interaction, these rules and patterns get established in the learner's mind. So it was claimed that if the input is understood, there is and there is enough of input data, then the necessary grammar is automatically provided. So speaking is a result of acquisition, and the ability to communicate in a second language, it cannot be taught always directly, but it emerges through all these processes, and comprehensible input is very, very necessary for a comprehensible output. The last hypothesis of Krashen is the affective filter hypothesis. And according to the affective filter hypothesis, comprehensible input may not be utilized by a second language acquirers. So, if there is a mental block that prevents them from fully profiting from it, like Krashen, as you spoke about in 1985, this affective filter, it acts as a barrier to acquisition or maybe to learning. So if the filter is down, the input reaches the language acquisition device and becomes acquired competence. But if the filter is up, the input is blocked and it does not reach the language acquisition device. So here we're talking about a mental block particularly. We must have noticed that, uh, I mean, the learners also have to be motivated to learn something new, right? And there are a number of reasons for not being motivated. So that acts as a mental block. So, Krashen maintained that acquirers need to be open to the input, and that when the effective is up, the learner may understand what is seen and read or what is being told to them, but the input will not reach the lad. So, this occurs when the acquirer is unmotivated, so lacking in confidence or concerned with failure. And the filter is down when the acquirer is not conscious and is intent on becoming a member of that particular language group. So, many researchers agree with Krashen on this basic assumption, such as the need to move from, grammar based to a communicatively oriented language instruction. The role of affective factors in language learning is very important, and it really helps the learner to develop in a very proper manner. So, with this, I would like to end the final session on language acquisition and language learning. Thank you.